Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for the second in the Sprint webinar series. This episode is called The Abyss. It is rightfully named because we're going to cover the most dreaded three letters in all of the web kingdom, and that is SEO, search engine optimization. It's an extremely complicated subject. Unfortunately for me, when we set up this Sprint webinar series, we asked everybody what you'd like us to talk about in them. The purpose of these webinars is to give you guys free ways to maximize your digital presence. Sometimes that has to do with your Run Free Project store. Sometimes that has nothing to do with Run Free Project. We see ourselves as the digital transformation engine for Run Specialty. We hope you see us that way too, building tools and enabling you guys to do everything that you possibly can to maximize your online presence. And as such, we want to make sure that we give you some of the tools that we use and take advantage of every day, being constantly swamped with tech. SEO is a really interesting subject. And to be honest with you, this is a really hard webinar to put together. There's a lot of different entry points into SEO. There's a lot to take into account. It's one of those areas that is much more an art than a science. And so I think I did a reasonable job of tackling this subject. Curious about the feedback that everybody has. But let's go ahead and get started. Now, this episode, by the way, is being recorded, so you'll be able to fire it up and walk alongside me on demand whenever you want to. So don't worry about scribbling down notes or anything, or trying to digest all this madness all at once. Just sit back and relax and enjoy the dulcet tones of my slightly nasal drone. Okay, enough of my blabbering. So what is SEO and why am I being so whiny about how complicated it is? At its simplest, here's the deal. Every day, bajillions of people break out their laptops, smartphones, dishwashers, SUVs, and anything else you can think of that's connected to the internet, and they search for stuff. By stuff, I mean websites that are related to a topic that they're curious about or that might provide an answer to a question that they have. And they do this by visiting their favorite search engine. Pretty straightforward, right? The most common and the standard when it comes to the SEO conversation is Google. And these people type a phrase or question, typically referred to as a keyword, even though it's often more than one word, into the search box and click go. The search engine uses its very well-funded proprietary tools to search through its list of websites and pages to find the most relevant results. And then it lists them in descending order of relevance to whatever the user typed into the search box. Meaning, based on Google's rules, the web page that's most relevant to the keyword searched for is displayed first at the top, followed by the second most relevant, etc. And the practice of setting up your website and its pages so they'll be considered the most relevant search result for a keyword, that's called search engine optimization or SEO. It's extremely complex, as I've said 13 times by now. It is more of an art than a science, and you'll see why as we kind of go through this. But armed with some key concepts and a couple of ground rules, you can maximize your website's SEO and bring more customers to your virtual doorstep yourself. And you'll also be better informed about when it's appropriate to bring somebody in from a paid perspective to give you some air support. Now, before we dive into the meat of things, I think it's important to set some expectations. Let's talk the art of the possible. In the world of marketing and design, there's a popular meme that expresses this concept pretty well. It's the three birds. If you give me 10 seconds to draw you a bird, no matter how hard I try or how talented I am, I'm going to create something that looks similar to the figure on the right. If you give me a minute to draw the same bird, you'll get a better result than the 10-second version because I had more resources, time in this case, at my disposal to do it. And then if you give me 10 minutes to draw it, you'll get the best result of the three because I've had adequate time to meet your expectation for a well-constructed drawing of a bird. Ultimately, the message is that there's a direct correlation between your SEO performance and the resources you allocate to it. You're going to get out what you put in. And the goal of this talk is to give you a solid understanding of the mechanics of SEO, what reasonable expectations look like in the context of your brand and the resources you have at your disposal, and how to start with the right mindset. If there's one thing that is truer today than it's ever been before, it is with SEO, there are no shortcuts, no magic wands, and no silver bullets. A couple of years back, a special combination of word placement and formatting could jumpstart your position in search engine results, but times have changed a lot. SEO has evolved enormously, and all those cheats have pretty much been wiped away. But don't worry, by understanding a few key components, you can maximize the results of your effort and broaden your online reach. And it's not rocket science once you get your skis on top of the water. So, happy face. So the deal here is there's an entire industry out there that's dedicated to the practice of SEO. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record. Well, that's weird. There we go. And it would take me a million years to cover it all, especially with my tightly honed skills in brevity. But there are a few topics and tricks within them that we can cover that'll equip you to take action and see some real material growth in traffic to your website, which, executed properly, can turn into more sales both online and in store. So the first thing we're going to cover is how Google works. We'll talk about what that means for you. That means understanding what's reasonable and how to implement it in real life. We'll talk about on-page SEO. That's the stuff on your actual website and or run-free storefront and how to set it up for maximum impact. Then we'll talk about off-page SEO. That's social media, third-party references to how awesome you are, like trade rags and magazine articles, and how to tie it all together to work in your favor. Sounds easy enough, right? First, how Google works. More specifically, how Google search works. In its most basic terms, modern SEO is based on a document written by Google called the Quality Raters Guidelines, or QRG. You'll have a copy delivered to your inbox after this webinar. Don't worry. It's a real snooze fest. It's 175 pages of guidelines that explain what the perfect web page looks like to Google and how it assigns a high search quality rating to that page. Obviously, the higher the quality rating, the higher the rank. So all this came about a few years ago when Google hired literally thousands of people to go website by website and answer survey questions about those websites. The idea was if they got actual human views of how well a website matches a search, they could replicate that with their magical army of developers and machine learning technology. And, for those of us who use Google, which is pretty much all of us, they've done a pretty good job. We don't know for sure exactly how Google does this. That's the secret sauce, so to speak. But ultimately, they took all these surveys and enhanced their search algorithm based on those answers. Now, they still employ these thousands of people, and it's assumed that this survey comparison development process continues to this day. Why does this matter? Because when you're thinking about modern SEO, the humanness of the content, the value that it provides to a human reader by being as relevant to their keyword as possible, is the most important thing to consider when you're building content to improve your site's SEO. Gone are the days where special combinations of keywords or simply filling in the meta tags and description will do the trick, which, unfortunately makes it harder to achieve a high rank in search results, but ultimately it gives Google's users a better experience, and that's what keeps them ahead of their competition and swimming in cash. So with a backdrop of human readability to set the stage, I've listed 6 of the more than 200 factors that Google considers when ranking a page for a specific keyword when it returns search results. At the top of this list is relevance, and it's highlighted because it is the most important piece, particularly when it comes to developing your SEO strategy, and you'll see why in a couple of minutes. It doesn't matter how amazing your blog post is about calf stretches. If somebody Googles how to install a trailer hitch, your calf stretch blog isn't going to show up in the search results because it has no relevance to the keyword being searched. Pretty straightforward, right? The next is quality backlinks. Basically, when other websites, especially relevant websites with established authority, and authority is something that we'll talk a lot about today, um, on the keyword of focus, reference your content by linking to it. You get a boost in your ranking because Google's algorithm assumes that you must be reputable if other sites, especially other reputable sites, are linking to you. The more backlinks from authorities on the subject, the better the reputation you'll develop. The next one down is user experience. This one's a bit more mysterious as far as how they judge this, but the concept, I think, is that if somebody clicks on your page from Google and then they spend a lot of time on that page, Google assumes that they were satisfied with the relevance of your content to their search result originally, and you get brownie points for it. There's some technical aspects to the user experience thing that we'll talk about in just a little while once you're completely drinking from the fire hose and confused or asleep, depending on how you approach these kinds of things. The next factor is EAT, which is a term Google coined that stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. There are lots of components that contribute to this one, including the backlinks that I mentioned before, and it's kind of a cyclical concept. How long your website's been around plays into it, for sure, but really it's the orbit of your relevance to certain keyword searches, your authority on those subjects, which is determined by your website content, and the number of other authorities on that same subject linking to it. It's a cycle we'll talk about more in a little while. The other two I listed here are pretty self-explanatory. Use of images in the body of the content is important for the user experience, and it'll help you out, as well as the websites you link to. Do those outbound links score high in the EAT realm? Are you an authority? Hopefully you can kind of see how this becomes cyclical when it comes to authoritativeness and expertise. And the list literally goes on forever. Like I said, SEO is truly a deep abyss. Now you're probably thinking, so what am I supposed to do with all this trivial nonsense besides feel more confused and dejected than I was before you started blathering, Rob? We'll get there, I promise. Here's where the rubber meets the road. Let's talk about what all this means and what action you can take right now that's reasonable using free tools to build and improve your site and your store's SEO. Now, a disclaimer. There are 1,000 ways to skin this cat, and this particular technique, it might not be your style, and that's okay. This will hopefully give you a good idea of how you might put the concepts that we're covering into practice in a way that works for you. The part that is immutable is not necessarily the execution, but certainly the way that keyword relevance, reasonableness, and competitiveness applies in your strategy. More on that in a second. Okay, so the plan is we're going to create a blog. Blogs are excellent, easy mechanisms to build SEO and authority for your website and your domain, which includes the store that you have with the Run Free project. That is, if you're a customer of ours. If not, what's stopping you? They're also relatively easy to create, and focus on very specific subject matter is normal blog fodder, meaning Google's human level expectations won't be misled into thinking that you're trying to hack a shortcut to SEO nirvana. Blog post 1 is going to focus on one of the relevant keywords that matches the criteria we're going to lay out in the next couple of minutes. Now remember, keyword's just a term. In search engine lingo, a keyword can actually be an entire sentence or phrase, just to keep it as confusing as possible. And then blog post 2 is going to focus on another keyword that you've selected using the process I'm about to cover, and so on with subsequent blog posts into infinity. Now, the frequency with which you post is entirely up to you. My suggestion is to post once every 2 weeks, so do your keyword research to plan for that. And I'll show you how to do keyword research in a minute. Keep in mind that it takes around 6 to 8 months to see major spikes in traffic because of Google's stepped ranking system. So commit to starting and don't quit. You will see results. Remember, there's no shortcut to good SEO, just like there's no shortcut to successfully running a marathon. And I know you're probably thinking, geez, is an increase in traffic to my website really worth this kind of effort? 6 to 8 months is an eternity. The answer is yes. Like it or not, people live their lives online. E-commerce sales will continue to be a growing percentage of the business you do or leave on the table in the future. And presenting your brand to more people online by showing up in their Google searches and on their social media feeds will translate into more share of those potential sales in your pocket. As an example, one of our Run Free Project member stores, a small shop just like yours, who's put a little bit of time and effort into SEO, sold almost $250,000 worth of merchandise just online in 2020. Not a 10-location behemoth, a one-door store. SEO can pay serious dividends. So let's talk about how you pull this off. Before we start the actual blog content research keyword stuff, we need to strategize about what that content should be. At its core, Google search wants you to answer her question better than anyone else with the content that you create. So you need to figure out what her question's likely to be, then create content to answer it. The more specific you are, the higher the likelihood that you'll rank at the top. My animations are just absolutely awful today. I had it dialed in perfectly. It's been one of those days. Sorry. A big part of that consideration is competitiveness. Okay. So the keyword running has an average monthly search volume of around 246,000. That's a lot. The higher the search volume, the more content will have to compete with other people's content to rank at the top of the results. In contrast, see, here we go. I've completely messed up my animation on here. The keyword running store in Charlotte, which is where I am, Charlotte, North Carolina, has an average monthly search volume of 390. That's a whole lot less than 246,000, which means I have to compete with far fewer pieces of content to rise to the top of the list when somebody types running store in Charlotte into Google. The key consideration here is to recognize that since SEO is a direct result of the effort, as we discussed earlier, that you put in, and you have a run specialty store to keep in business, bills to pay, and kids to pick up from practice, you're going to have to be very careful with your strategy by selecting reasonable keywords to optimize for. These keywords should have relatively low volume, but not too low. We're looking for a sweet spot here. They need to be specific, not general, and offer results that you can compete with given your constraints. One trick is to regionalize your strategy. Running store in Charlotte is going to be a much less competitive keyword than simply running store because the former is only relevant to people in cities called Charlotte. In other words, having a goal of being number one in search results when somebody Googles Brooks Adrenaline 21 is probably not reasonable. It's too general. You're facing a lot of competition to be the top result. And there are very likely a lot of content creators out there who are putting more time and effort into their SEO to rank for this term than you'll ever be able to do. On the other hand, if your goal is to be the top search result when someone Googles running store in Charlotte, that's reasonable. You have a fighting chance because the keyword's very specific and you're going to have far fewer content creators competing with you for that top rank. So be reasonable when you're developing your keyword strategy. I can hear you thinking, how am I supposed to figure out what good keywords are? Well, there are lots of really great keyword research. There are lots of really great keyword research tools out there. One is Ahrefs, and another is SEMrush. But honestly, they are expensive, and we don't like to pay for stuff when it comes to these webinars. It is worth looking at these tools once you've kind of established your position and strategy. Certainly, the results that they provide are results from a smaller data set than Google uses. So they are most certainly not the Bible of the best way of doing things. And finding good keywords to use really involves a lot of trial and error. These tools just kind of help give you a view. Anyway, instead, I'm going to give you a crash course in something I like to call Bob's Bootleg Keyword Research. I actually just made that up. It's free, it's pretty straightforward, and it actually gives pretty decent results. Bonus, you won't have to hear my voice while you do it yourself. You'll have to hear it this time. Also, please don't call me Bob. Cool, there's Google. All right, so the deal is this. I have no idea what keywords I'm going to be competitive for, and I have no idea what those results are going to look like. So I really do have to just start trying. So I'm going to start broad. I'm going to go in and enter running into Google. Okay. And you can see my results here. There are a few things to take note of. First, there's this people also ask section. Now, this is a section that's fed by some very complex SEO related stuff that companies with more money than we have contribute to. So while this can kind of help you get your arms around what might be a more specific search term to look at, the real ticket is down here. Searches related to running. So these are other searches that people have actually entered into Google that run along this same subject. So we're going to go down a rabbit hole. Let's see what makes sense here. Running definition, probably not. How about running benefits? Let's go there. So true to form, I haven't actually gone through this with the term running, so we'll see what happens. So we've gotten a little bit more specific. Running benefits. Okay, we see these same people also ask questions. We might want to make note of that. Let's scroll down here to the very bottom. Well, I'm sorry, I skipped a step. Let's take a look at the top results. 10 amazing benefits of running you might not have known. Podiumrunner.com. Now, I would imagine that podiumrunner.com is probably a relatively authoritative site. They probably have their whole job probably is to publish content on the subject of running. And so my ability to compete with those folks as a run specialty store, probably not super high. Same goes with down the line, shape.com, a magazine. People are writing literally every day, multiple people. I can't compete with that. In other words, I need to get more specific. So let's see. Running benefits of running every day. I might shortcut this process in a minute. But you see the pattern that we've got going here. You've got the people also may ask. I see here that Healthline is at the top of this. Everyday Health, Run Repeat, that you guys know their name. I'm getting a little bit further down in the maybe competitive area of things, but yeah, here's Runner's World, Podium Runner. Again, still way too high level. Let's talk about benefits of running every day for 30 minutes. Again, we're kind of following the rabbit down the hole. Running every day for benefits, active.com. So you can see here that a lot of these, since I started with an extremely general term, running, a lot of these are still extremely competitive, healthline.com, active.com. And when I say competitive, what I mean is that, they've focused a ton of time and effort and probably money on their own SEO. So my ability to go in and bootstrap a blog every couple of weeks that's going to beat them at becoming the high rank, probably a low chance of doing that. So, as I mentioned before, one of the kind of hacks to find something specific that you might want to take a look at is to get regional with it. So let's try running in Charlotte, NC. Okay. So it's a little bit more specific. Greatruns.com, cool. Medium.com, we know that they're large and authoritative. All Trails, yeah, still a little high. But I'm starting to get a little bit more specific. So kiss951.com, that's a local radio show. Let's see if we can get deeper. Let's go down here to searches related to running in Charlotte. Let's see, Little Sugar Creek Greenway. So this is extremely specific. This is a very popular greenway in the city of Charlotte that has been kind of revamped in recent years. But this might be a great subject to write about. So I can see here the Carolina Thread Trail map it tends to be the highest. We've got a Wikipedia entry, the government website. I could, at this stage, I could compete with this stuff. I could say, let's look down here and see what they say. Little Sugar Creek Greenway map, extension, how long is. We could go so far as to say something like, running on the. Yeah, so you get these kind of listing sites. Again, All Trails, Trail Run Project. And whenever you pop up with a site that's going to kind of list information like this, you know that you're getting down to the nitty gritty, and you can probably compete with this. To slow this process, because I could literally do this forever, and I'm just making things up on the fly, I'm going to say running store in Charlotte. And I'm going to do this because I want to show you what the perfect setup is. So here you go. The top result for me is Charlotte Running Company. Top 10 best running stores in Charlotte. This is kind of an automated creation. Run for Your Life. Love those guys. As you can see here, these are locally sourced pieces of content. It's going to be significantly easier for me to create something that competes in this realm. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to write down what did I put? Running store in Charlotte as a keyword that I might focus on, and kind of repeat this process. That's the tactical part of the Bob's Bootleg Keyword Research piece. And you can see down here that things get a little bit deeper. So like Charlotte Running Company coupon, running store Charlotte NC. Again, it's an art, not a science, but this is the best way to do keyword research. Again, finding a place that you can compete reasonably is really where it's going to be. As far as how to approach this, my suggestion would be to start off by answering specific questions. Blog posts that are somewhere around 1,200 words long. Focus on thoroughly and completely answering the question in the mind of the searcher. These quick wins are going to help you rank in Google searches quickly. And as this happens, your site's going to gain authority, which will make it easier for you to rank higher with content on broader subject. So as far as, how to get this process started, because I've shown you the keyword research process, but as you can clearly see, finding the right things to start with is key. Otherwise, you'll kind of walk in circles. Gather your staff and some beers and brainstorm questions that your customers or people in the area interested in stuff that you guys have going on might ask, and then give bonus Jaeger shots to the folks who can regionalize those questions to the geographical area you serve and write it all out. The more the merrier, and then take the technique I just showed you and game them out. Drill down, see what the results are. If you run across a forum, or, and when I say forum, I mean, like a specific All Trails listing for the Little Sugar Creek Greenway, it would be considered a forum. Or, a local site whose competitiveness and time that they can put into SEO optimization is probably within your reach, then you're good. And you can put a star next to that. And what'll end up happening is, you see which fit the model or which new ones you discover in your research, and you'll start to see patterns and relationships as you do this, just like Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie. Great movie. But as you start to discover those patterns and relationships, you'll get better at finding better keywords and key phrases. So that's the gist of keyword research. Again, it's an art. So now that you know what you need to do and you have a method to gather intel on your blog post subject matter, we need to talk about some of these other concepts like on-page SEO, how to present your content, the format, the layout, etc. That's all really important when it comes to maximizing your potential to rank for your keywords. And as you dig through this stuff and start to see some of these keywords and phrases emerge that you can compete with, you can start to put together a string of blog posts that might feature those keywords over a period of time that makes sense. I'll give you an example at the end when we talk about off-page SEO that might work, but hopefully that gives you a starting point. Now, there's a ton of information out there about on-page SEO, and frankly, it can drag you into the abyss pretty quickly. A lot of what's going on with the on-page SEO stuff, a lot of what I'm going to touch on today is probably the classic stuff most people think of when they think about search engine optimization. But as you can see, it's really one of the final steps in executing your strategy. The most important part is developing a strategy to create content that's going to draw people that you're interested in, i.e. people that are going to shop with you, to your site using keywords you can compete with. That's the key. Now, here's the thing. The whole on-page SEO thing, it's absolutely important. It can be learned and it's easy to repeat. If you're not technically minded, this might be the moment that you bring in somebody who's more SEO literate to help you create a template for your blog posts that meets these criteria that you can reuse. Again, just like the picture of the birds, it really all depends on how much time and effort you want to put into the final product. Feel free to play around. Making imperfect content is far better than doing nothing. If you're publishing a blog once every couple of weeks, once a month, whatever the cadence is, you're developing authority. You are going to rank higher simply by publishing a blog on a regular occasion. Also, these items are explained in detail using human readable English at the URL in pink towards the bottom of your screen. I would suggest reading that article once you've done all your keyword research and you have a plan for world domination. Don't go to the on-page factors until you've gone through your keyword research phase, because I think it gets overwhelming. You'll have the momentum and the clarity of thought around your keywords at the end of your keyword research phase, and all this on-page factors stuff and terminology will make more sense to you. Okay, on to the list. Okay, first, Google will squash you if your site isn't using SSL. The way you can tell if the URL of your site is using SSL is the URL has HTTPS at the beginning. If it does, then you're using SSL and you're good. For those of you who are Run Free Project members, all of the Run Free stores are using SSL. You're good to go. If it has just HTTP, you need to SSL enable your website. There's lots of resources out there to step you through it. I'll drop a couple links in an email that we follow up this webinar with to point you in the right direction. But that step might be one you reach out for help on. And if you have a web designer, it is very likely that they know how to do this for you. Now, I put this in here because it's just so important. It really is the key. Without this, none of this other stuff matters at all. even though we've been talking about it the entire time, I still added it. Your content needs to be uniquely valuable. In other words, it needs to be of high quality and could be described by at least, say, 80% of visitors as being useful, valuable, and unique. The story that you tell. You need to provide a good user experience as well. That means the content and navigation elements are easy to understand by the user that comes to your site. It loads quickly. It's responsive for mobile devices. Most website builders like Wix or Squarespace, they take care of this for you. Not that big of a deal. If the page that you're trying to get people to go to is nested in more than 3 or 4 clicks of a menu, you may take a hit on user experience. You may want to think about simplifying things. But generally speaking, if you're using a website builder like Wix or Squarespace, you're good to go. So make sure that elements are keyword targeted. This is where the technical terminology starts to flood the room. You want to be sure the content targets a single keyword. Remember, like I said before, that could be a phrase. Keyword is just the term. Target that single keyword as we discussed before, and that keyword is written in the title element. It appears in the URL. It's in bold somewhere on the page, and images on the page have descriptive, keyword-rich alt attributes, among other things. Again, this is all listed out at this link down here. I'm just trying to give you a high-level view of some of the requirements. i.e., if that doesn't make sense, don't worry. It'll walk you through it. This is also a lot of what you see when you're poking around in your Run Free dashboard in the SEO tools. So this is my sandbox site. You guys have probably seen it. If I go here to log in and I head over to manage inventory, well, let me start here. If I go to store settings, manage SEO, you'll see a lot of the things that I talked about today. So the title. So I want to make sure that my meta title shows my store name. Meta keywords could be the best e-commerce platform in the world, comma, best e-commerce platform for running stores, etc. Again, these keywords really depend on the research that you've done. Meta description, this is 160 characters that describes your online store. Make sure to shop local. We love the city of Charlotte and running around the city of Charlotte, something along those lines. Your sitemap. So a very big part of search engine optimization, and I'll talk about that in just a second, is this bot accessibility, meaning that Google and others send a robot out to crawl the web to gather new information so that its search results are relevant and new, and so that you don't necessarily have to do anything. But there are some things that you can do to make that job easier for that process. The first is to create a sitemap. So on your website, you may have to take some steps to do that. But here in the Run Free store, which is an extension of your website and resides on your domain, so anything you do here is going to contribute to your authority as well as your SEO. We do that for you, and you can access that sitemap there. It's updated automatically as things change in your store. And we give you the ability to plug into some of the more popular search engines directly, given an account that you may have. And that way we're automatically pushing that information to the Googles, the Bings, and the Yandexes of the world, in case it takes them 3 or 4 days to send the robots our way. We can get there faster. So you can access all those kind of on-page technical keyword metadata related things here. You can also go into manage inventory, grab an item, click edit, scroll down here to the bottom, and you've got SEO stuff down here as well. So you can set specific keywords for this item. You can create a special page title. You can add that alt text keywords for images that I just mentioned, item description and SEO. So you have lots of options here to expand your SEO strategy to specific items, to brands as well. So you have SEO capability, SEO adjustment capability here in your brand settings and in your category settings. So you can do all that in here. So you've got the ability to make it a whole lot easier to take care of that technical stuff on the Run Free side. Some of that stuff may be a little bit more involved on your website, but at least you have a punch list to get started. So when we talk about built to be shared through social networks, which is the next item on the list, what I really mean is that you're following open graph standards. Again, this gets a little in the weeds, but it's important to mention, and each website building tool or provider does it differently. Basically, Open Graph is a standard that makes sure that when you copy a URL and paste it into a text message or onto social media, that a picture automatically appears and it has a little headline and a brief summary down below, so it looks nice and neat. Everybody's seen it. You see it all the time on your Facebook feeds and iMessage if you're an Apple user. You want to make sure that you're doing that stuff. And then, of course, we talked about the crawler/bot accessible and friendly stuff. That's right there and automated for you on the Run Free side. And then anything you do on your website, your designer can help you. This link can also help you. And finally, authorship, metadata, schema, and rich snippets. These checklist items really encompass the completeness of metadata, things like keywords, tags, etc., assigning an author when you write a blog post, making sure that the meta description inspires interest. It's that human readability piece that's important. Now, if your eyes have glazed over at this point, or if you have no clue what I just got finished talking about on this slide, that is okay. This is the more technical side of SEO that'll take some poking around and reading to get the hang of. The important part is that you have a reference in your head and that you can go to so you know where it belongs in the context of your SEO strategy. In other words, we spent most of our time here today figuring out the keywords we want to try to compete for, how to research those keywords using freeness, and then building a blog to support that endeavor. It's only after that strategy's been built and the time comes to put pen to paper that we start thinking about these on-page SEO technical requirements. A lot of folks make the mistake of starting with these requirements before going through their keyword strategy. And the message here is don't fall into that trap. So we've learned how Google works. We built a good starter strategy to kickstart your SEO. We touched on the mechanics of on-page SEO and how that applies in your Run Free store. Now let's talk about off-page SEO. Wrapping your head around off-page SEO really involves recognizing the simple fact that your reputation matters a whole lot to Google. This is why backlinks or links from other reputable sites to your content matter so much in search rankings. The idea is if other people point to you, there's a high likelihood that you're an authority on the subject of whatever they're referencing when they point to you. So it's a good idea to have a strategy around how you manage that. And I'm going to give you a few ideas to get the gears turning. Ultimately, off-site SEO is about participating in the conversation. Just like on-site SEO, there's no quick trick to game the system. But luckily, there are a whole lot of ways to participate in the digital conversation, and most of you are doing it already. So before I get into specifics, be sure that you have a good, complete, and interesting About Us page on your website. Name names, Show the world that you, your employees, and your brand are engaged and authoritative in the world of running. This helps immensely. Google loves it. People who don't know who you are love to read about who you are. Very important. Build a robust About Us page on your website. Now, when it comes to offsite, you can focus your strategy on 3 different buckets. Social media, which includes the usual suspects you see up here on your screen. You don't necessarily have to spread yourself thin across all of them, but based on your store, your customers, and how they engage and what feels right to you, you can choose wisely and commit to participating in that space. The second bucket is what I call trade amplifiers. These are the industry insider rags, distribution lists, websites, and trade shows where you can amplify your voice to the broader industry and potentially beyond. Participating here will really help develop that authority that Google cherishes so deeply, and it'll often help inform some of your new keyword research when you see successful things that other people have done. And it also gives you something to talk about. Like lots of our stores received awards for best running stores last night. Congratulations, guys. And then they rightfully use the receipt of those awards to tell the world that they're an authority in the space. Prospective customers see that, they check you out, they feel better about the message coming from your brand and about the value of what you've built. Good stuff. The third bucket is what I call PR. This category includes articles that might be written about you, your store, or something that you're involved in that may not necessarily touch the running industry directly, but could draw attention to you from a broader audience of potential prospects. It also includes magazines or websites with broad readership that may be associated with running, but who speak to that broad audience of potential prospects. In a lot of situations, ticking off participation in the PR bucket is pay to play. And this is the most difficult to get a foothold in. But it is important to note and worth mentioning as an influencer of your authority and a driver for site traffic, even though out of these 3 buckets, I'd probably rank it as number 3. With all that being said, it's important to remember what we're trying to accomplish with all this work. Yes, it's important to be involved in the digital universe to be successful in retail, but ultimately our goal is to drive traffic to your site that creates authority and preferably income. Why am I saying this? Well, there's a very particular strategy you should take when you're linking all of your offsite SEO efforts to all the SEO stuff that we've just covered. For example, when you make a post on social media, whether that's an Instagram post or a video on YouTube, you want to be sure that content is relevant to and links to the specific blog post or page you've written that's tailored to maximize your rankings in Google when someone searches the keyword that you've chosen. Just like when we're thinking about search engine relevance, offsite SEO relevance works exactly the same way. If I click on your Facebook post that features your latest blog, I'm going to expect to read something engaging about the subject I clicked on in your post. And if that happens, I'll go back and share that post, driving more traffic to you and improving your authority on the subject that's covered in that post. So it comes full circle. Now, the part that I haven't mentioned yet is the call to action. You want to be sure that when it's appropriate in the context of whatever you choose to write your blog post about, you're giving your reader a call to action. In a perfect world, that call to action would take them to buy a product from your online store, hosted by the Run Free Project, of course. I'll give you an example. Let's say that I own a store called The Running Mouth, and a lot of my customers are long-distance trail runners. I myself am a long-distance trail runner, and a lot of the community aspect of my brand revolves around trail running events that I both sponsor and participate in. Following the formula that we talked through today, I've decided that I'm going to write a blog post about the time I got lost on the Appalachian Trail with no cell phone service. It'll be a long-form story, probably somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 words, complete with pictures from my adventure. And my story is going to discuss how using the Garmin InReach Mini saved me from certain death. Peppered throughout that story will be links to buy that device and maybe some other related gear in my online store. Then when I go to post it on Facebook, I can say, just posted the latest blog. This tells the tale of the one time I almost froze to death on Roan Mountain and how I was able to cheat that death, or something to that effect. It's just an example to illustrate the connective tissue of all this, but hopefully it shows you how you can create content in an interesting and engaging way while imploring readers to make purchases without seeming too salesy or pushy. And that's key. Now, I know this is a very chewy subject, and it was a real challenge to try to boil down to something that's consumable. Um, and I may have created more questions than I answered in this session. But my hope is that I've given you a glimpse into how the world of SEO works, how you can enter into that fray yourself on your own terms and without spending any money, and how to think about SEO more holistically when you consider making monetary investments in amplification. What I mean is, there are a lot of people and companies out there where all they do is search engine optimization. They can help you run Google ads, they can do remarketing for you, they can help you run campaigns and do the technical on-page SEO stuff that feels overwhelming. And a lot of those companies are worth the money. And now you have a good idea of where your strengths are, where you may need help, and if you do decide to invest some cash in the endeavor, exactly where you want to point your wallet. My suggestion is to have the brainstorming session. Sit down with, folks that people, employees are great, even some customers. Start gaming out some potential keywords and phrases. The key is make it a question and make it somewhat unique. Remember, we're trying to find that sweet spot where where the question is something that your customers might ask. The results are relatively low competitiveness, meaning that you could do, less than runnersworld.com to rank, and then create content based on that. And once you go through that exercise and you play around with the Googling technique that I showed you before, you'll get a real feel for what you can talk about and how you might apply that to the things that you're doing. At that point in time, if you want to invest in some assistance on the technical side, or if you want to invest in, amplifying your message through ads or any other digital marketing technique, you'll at least have a good idea of how you want to tackle the problem. And you'll get a lot more bang for your buck out of those relationships. If and when you make that decision, I'd recommend going with somebody who's literate in the run specialty industry. And if you can, go with somebody who's produced results for other stores that you're friends with or other, folks in the industry. Demonstrated success is always a good thing. I know a lot of you guys know Parker Carnan and Carnan Associates. A lot of you work with them today. They have an excellent platform/service that they've recently released called CamRun that may be a fit for helping you realize returns on your SEO and marketing strategy. A lot of you also work with Upper Quadrant as well. They have a lot of great offerings around digital marketing and automation that could help you grow there too. And there's tons more. There's a lot of potential. And I hope you can see that one size doesn't necessarily fit all. So where one vendor product could be perfect for my in-store activities at the Running Mouth, it may not be, that's my pretend running store, by the way. It may not be fit for Pete and the guys at the Running Zone in Florida. I think you guys have heard enough of my nonstop blathering. Let me stop sharing my screen and jump over here to see if there are any questions that have come through. None yet, which means that I've successfully put everyone on the call to sleep or terrified you to such an extent that you want to forget that we ever had this conversation. If you do have a question, drop it in the Q&A area right there. Everybody's muted since this is a webinar setup. Type it in and I'll be happy to run through it. Keep in mind, and I think I've probably said this 3 or 4 times now, that the starting place is that brainstorming session around keywords, and the bootleg keyword research stuff, figuring out where you think you can compete. That's what you should do first. Then, if creating a blog is your style, use those keywords that you've selected and done research on to start creating blog posts. If you want to do something different, create pages or, do a series of social media posts that take people to, store pages or whatever. Use your imagination, get creative. Ultimately, it's that keyword research followed by the action. I suggest blog because being active in how you post blogs is very, very healthy for your building authoritativeness. It keeps you on Google's radar. It helps you move through that stepped ranking system much, much faster. So a question just came in. Assuming we have good SEO in the backgrounds, i.e. Squarespace, Wix, etc., with good page titles, etc., is today's battle cry to create content? I'm sure you were typing that as I was blathering, but yes, absolutely. Content is king, 100%. Another question, we do a lot of videos on our blog, but it's simply an embed and a few links to find the video on Facebook too. Will blog posts with more words / content be better? This is a phenomenal question. Yes. What I would suggest is keep in mind that people are much more likely to engage with media, meaning pictures, videos, etc. But pair that media with a blog post that gives some kind of an overview of what they're about to watch or listen to, or that gives a follow-up to one of the subjects that's covered in the video. So for example, you could talk about, and I'm just making things up here. I can't guarantee that this would, be a worthwhile endeavor, but you could talk about, the pluses and minuses of the Garmin InReach Mini, going back to that example that I used. And then the blog post that you either point people to and or that video is posted as part of can talk about, what happened to you and how you used it, and then link to your store. The reason that you have to do that is because Google's only going to search static content. It's only going to search words that are written. It's not going to be able to look at, the content from, say, a video or other piece of media, SlideShare, something like that. When it comes to keywords, should we aim to broaden our topics over time as we become more of an authority in the space, or should we continue to niche down and create locally relevant content? This is another phenomenal question. I can tell you, listen, I'm so happy. I thought I had killed everybody. Yes, but do it in a measured way. Understand where you're competitive and where you're not. There are lots of tools that you can use to see how people are engaging with your content. Google Analytics is a popular one. There are lots of YouTube videos about how to use Google Analytics. And if you see a great deal of engagement around a specific subject, then you can take a dice roll at broadening that subject. Authority is really going to be the primary variable in how broad you can get and still be effective. So, if you've been pumping out content for 6 to 8 months and you want to get much more broad, you're going to have far more success in that scenario than if you published a whole bunch of blog posts over the next couple of days to try and kind of speed the process and then get broader there. Okay, so another question. I see a lot of podcasts and videos. Wait, why am I not on video? Might as well take advantage of it. Here we go. Okay. I see a lot of podcasts and videos posted with a write-up or even a transcript. This slays many dragons. Media for the people, static content for SEO. 100%. Definitely. The transcript is a good way to kind of hack that process. But keep in mind that a transcript is going to be word for word what you've spoken, and reading something that somebody's spoken feels a little weirder than reading something that's been intended to read. So use your best judgment. Human readability really is a big part of it. And also taking those on-page SEO elements and implementing them. So for example, if I've got a podcast, I'll use the same thing. If I've got a podcast where I'm talking about my adventures, where the Garmin InReach Mini saved me, I want to make sure that once I've done my keyword research and I've found the keyword / key phrase that seems to work best, that I feel I can compete in for that post, I want to make sure that that's in the title of the page. I want to make sure that that is in the first paragraph of the written content. I want to make sure that it's mentioned at least one other time on the page, and it's bolded somewhere on that page. I think the preference is still in the first paragraph, but reference that article from Moz that I linked to earlier on the on-page SEO thing to get the details. But great question. Okay. Regarding retargeting, marketing, etc., is it more or less neither beneficial to target these content posts as opposed to general homepage? Possibly different pages for different people, new customers versus current engaging followers? This is a really great question. So for those who haven't gone down this rabbit hole, retargeting is a concept where someone visits your website and they look at something and then they leave and they're searching other websites, and those other websites participate in displaying ads for a retargeting company. Let's say like AdRoll is the most popular that I know of. And that retargeting company, based on that individual's browsing history and based on whether you're paying them to help you, is going to display an ad from your store somewhere on that page. So for example, I go and I check out, Brooks Ghost 13 on your online store, and I have an account with AdRoll and I'm doing remarketing. If I go and read, a post from the neighborhood association later on that day, and the neighborhood association does Google ads or participates in other, ad distribution type things where you see like the little squares on the side of the page, I'm going to probably see something come up for my store. That whole remarketing thing is a lot of what everybody jokes about when we talk about, is my phone listening to me? Because it knows where you've been. Dun, dun, dun. But I've gone down the rabbit hole. Sorry. Yes and no. The answer is yes and no. It is always good to be as specific as possible, because you're going to have lower competition as you increase specificity. However, as you increase specificity, the potential size of your audience decreases. So if you're thinking about it in a graph, you want to get as close to the intersection of specificity and audience size as you possibly can. You have a little bit more leeway when it comes to things like ads than you do when you're doing organic stuff. So play around with it and see the results that you get. That's the best advice that I can give. You're going to get different results depending on how often you're posting blogs, how many other authoritative sites are linking to you. A lot of the other kind of authority ranking stuff will even come into play when you're talking about ads. One other comment on ads. So Google Ads, used to be called Google AdWords, is a great keyword research tool. Now, the reason I didn't cover it today is because it costs money, and we want to talk about stuff you can do for free. However, if you want to do Google Ads, it's based on keywords. So you could do the same keyword researching process that we talked about earlier, the brainstorming session, and then you can use Google Ads as a check on whether or not what you've decided on is good. So, for example, I can go in and, my search term could be lives saved by the Garmin InReach Mini. I'm making things up. This is probably not a good search term. I put that in my ad. I create an ad in Google AdWords around that. And then as time goes on, I can see it. Google's going to tell me in its reports what people searched for, where they ended up displaying that ad. So they'll show you relevant searches that are actually happening where you've paid for that click, and you can adjust your SEO strategy from there. That's a good one too. And I'll send you guys some links to some of these other tools that people use for website health and determining authority. The two that I've used that are very, very good are Ahrefs and SEM Rush. It's a pretty big investment. You're talking about, $100 a month. I think, I don't know if this is still the case, I may be a liar, but I think that you can purchase a 7-day free trial from one of those two, and then just remember to cancel it before the end of the 7 days, and you'll get a pretty solid amount of functionality out of it. So you could play around with that too. Okay, cool. That's all the questions that I got so far. Guys, I hope that this was useful to you. This is a really tough subject. And if you have questions, obviously, I'm here to help with some air support. I'll send links to all the stuff that I mentioned, as well as that QRG. And, would love feedback, would love info on any other subjects that you'd like to cover next month. And we'll see you out there. For those who are customers, thank you for being a part of the project. I wouldn't be sitting here in this really weird booth without you. And for those who aren't, we would love to have you join the project. This kind of thing is something that we always do. If you've been unfortunate enough to listen to my blathering on a demo, hopefully I have reiterated to you how committed we are to our customers' success and being involved in that success. It's absolutely true. We eat our own dog food, as they say. I'll shut up. Thank you so much for joining. You guys have a great rest of your week.